The author says their names and aliases, those so-called Salafiyya. Question: who are the Mushabbihah? The Mushabbihah, the likeners or the God comparers, or the comparers, are an ancient deviant faction. I need to go back a long time to the days of the Salaf. They liken God's self to the selves of the creations, or his attributes to their attributes. Yep, that's in Al-Farqu Bayn Al-Firaq and At-Tafsiru Fi Din, that definition of Al-Mushabbihah. They may say that God is a light, or a man, or a soul, etc. They have all sorts of sayings. The so-called Salafis, or the followers of the Salafi Dawah as they call themselves, are a modern branch of the likeners, as we shall prove if Allah willed. Their ma'bud, their worshipped one, is some vague entity overhead. It's an imaginary UFO, unidentified flying object. They are worshippers of an imaginary body that they call Allah. Question: what does Salafi mean? Salafi means of the Salaf. The Salaf are the first 3 centuries of the Prophet's nation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we will come back to them later, by Allah's permission. Rather than being Salafi, they are Talafi, destructive. Do not call them Salafi, for they are impostors. If you must use the word, then call them so-called Salafis, or pseudo-Salafis, or the titular Salafis, or quasi-Salafis, for they are indeed bizarre and queer. Queer means strange. It's the real meaning of the word. Call them the Wahhabiyy, or the Wahhabis, as they were named by the scholars when they first deviated more than 200 years ago, emerging from Najd, Arabia, following their master, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. Question: what if he claims that there is no such faction called Wahhabiyya? Some do claim this, that there is no such sect called Wahhabis, or that this title was introduced by the non-Muslims like the British. Simply refer them to the book of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab's own brother, his very own brother that he tried to kill. The good scholar Sheikh Sulaiman ibn Abdul Wahhab, who wrote books refuting his brother and his brother's followers. Among those books is As-Sawa'iq al-Ilahiyya fi ar-Radd 'ala al-Wahhabiyya, the divine bolts in refuting the Wahhabis. And it has been printed. But I saw a copy of this book and the footnotes were not good. Very horrible. I don't know who published that book and then basically refuted the book in his footnotes. Question: is it even permissible to use the name Wahhabi? One would find many Wahhabis offended by being called Wahhabis. So the answer is yes. The answer is yes. Yes, it is. One would find many Wahhabis offended by being called Wahhabis, saying that it is sinful to use the term because it is derived from Allah's name, Al-Wahhab. They say using Allah's name for deviant people is belittling and forbidden. Yet more proof of their ignorance. Had they known some of the basics of the Arabic language, they would not argue this point. But this is a fallacy strong enough to at least make someone sympathetic for the Wahhabi. Someone might say, yeah, those people are deviants, but let's not call them Wahhabis. So it must be addressed. The answer to what they say is that in the books of Sarf, Arabic conjugation, which is the knowledge of the structures of the words, there is a topic of how to attribute something to something else called nasab. Yani, that's a chapter. A chapter in the books of Sarf. It's called nasab. Its most common rule is suffixing a doubled ya to the word. Yani, ya mushaddada. And that is what's transliterated throughout this book as IYY all the time. That's a representation of such a ya nisbah. That ya for nasab. For example, if one were a follower of Imam Malik, he would be called a Maliki. We have two Y's there because the ya is doubled. However, that doubled ya is not the only change that may happen to a word. Simply, if you want to do nasab for the name, yani, without details, if you want to do nasab for the name Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, the correct and blameless rule is to take it from the end of the name. Yani, you have someone named Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. That's his name. You want to attribute someone or some people to this person. He's their leader. So you have four words here: Muhammad and Ibn and Abd and Al-Wahhab. So you're going to choose one of these words to make the nasab from. The rule is to take it from the end of the name. That is why anyone who understands Arabic properly understands that when we say Wahhabi, we are not attributing those people to Al-Wahhab, who is Allah the Exalted. We are attributing them to Ibn Abdul Wahhab. And we mean Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. That is just like the nasab for Abdul Ashhal is. So that is just like the nasab for Abdul Ashhal is Ashhali. And for Abdul Qais is Qaisi. And a follower of Sheikh Abdul Qadir is Qadiri, etc. Therefore, a follower of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab is correctly called a Wahhabi. And Allah knows best. It's very simple. Let's take a look at this footnote here. Imam Ibn Malik gave the rules for attributing a compound name, for attributing to a compound name in his Alfiyah. That's the issue. We're dealing with a compound name. He said, وَانْسُبْ لِصَدْرِ جُمْلَةٍ وَصَدْرِ مَا رُكِّبَ مَزْجًا وَلِثَانٍ تَمَّمًا إضافة مبدوءة بابن أو أب أو ما له التعريف بالثاني وجب فيما سوى هذا انسبا للأول ما لم يخف لبس كعبد الأشهل. So these mean make nasab, attribution, by using the first segment of a name in the form of a sentence. That's a type of compound name. Sometimes a name in Arabic would be in the form of a sentence. We'll see. And by the first segment of a name composed by fusion, we mean a compound that's called tarkibun mazji. Mazj, two words that were fused together into one word. How would you make a nasab from a name that's in the form of a sentence? Because that exists in Arabic. And how would you make nasab for a name that's from two fused words? And by using the second segment that completes a genitive construction, started with ibn or ab. That's the idafa. The idafa that starts with ibn fulan and abu fulan. How would you make a nasab for that? Or the definiteness of its first segment is mandated by the second segment. Yani, we'll see. Concerning other than this, make nasab by using the first segment, as long as there is no fear of confusion, like the case of Abdul Ashhal. Okay, so that was his poetry in this topic of ours, and the attempt to translate that. Now let's take a look here. So this has a little bit more information than we need, but it's okay because it gives you some background information and it gives you some confidence that this information is correct. So this is the whole mas'ala here, the rules of which were mentioned by Ibn Malik. So a compound name in the form of a sentence, so that's called tarkib isnadi, is like someone named Ta'abbata Sharra. That's his name, Ta'abbata Sharra. His name means he tucked evil under his armpit. So nasab in this case goes to the first part of the name. So you would say Ta'abbati. Ta'abbati. That's clear. A compound name formed by fusion, so that's called tarkib mazji, is like Hadramaut. Because Hadr, that's one part, and Maut is the other part, but they got put together like one word. Hadramaut. The scholars say this second part, Maut, is like a ta' marbuta. They say it's like a ta' marbuta. Hadramaut, because ta' marbuta, did you ever notice that there's always a fatha before ta' marbuta? Unless it's an alif before it. Like you say muslimah, muslimat. That ta' marbuta is extra. You attach it to the back of a word and you put a fatha before it. So that's how this type of word is. Hadramaut. Nasab in this case also goes to the first part of the name. So one would be called Hadrami. We saw that in the book of obligatory knowledge. A compound name formed by genitive construction, tarkibun idafi, is like Ibn Zubayr and Abu Bakr and Ghulamu Zayd. So, son of Az-Zubayr, father of Bakr, lad of Zayd, or slave boy of Zayd. Nasab in this case goes to the second part of the name. So you'd say Zubayri and Bakri and Zaydi. If it is a different genitive construction, not one of the above, Ibn such and such or Abu such and such, for example, there are two cases. Either there's no ambiguity in putting the nasab in the first segment, or there is. It's like I was saying to you, we're dealing with the name Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. There's 4 words there. Out of those 4 words, we have to choose something for the nasab. So, whichever one you choose, one thing you have to consider is there ambiguity, meaning confusion? Is there confusion in the segment of the name that you choose for the nasab? If there's no ambiguity, no confusion, then the nasab is given to the first segment. Like in the case of Imri'ul Qais. Imri'ul Qais, you say Imri'i or Mara'i. Take the first part. But if there is confusion in using the first segment of this compound, then the nasab is given to the second segment, like Abdul Ashhal and Abdul Qais. Using the first segment for both is confusing because you'd say Abdi for Abdul Ashhal and you'd say Abdi for Abdul Qais, so there's confusion there. So you use the second segment and you'd say Ashhali and Qaisi. This is the case for Nasab to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. You correctly say Wahhabi. Like a follower of Abdul Qadir is called Qadiri. The author of Shadh al-Arf said, like they say about Abdu Manaf, Manafi, and Allah knows best. So, any question there about that case, that issue? Besides stealing Ahlul Sunnah's name, they also fraudulently call themselves Ahlul Haqq, the people of the truth in their claim. And Ahlul Hadith, the people of the science of Hadith. They have also been called La Madhhabiyya. Maybe we'll put a dash there. La Madhhabiyya, unsubscribed to any school of fiqh. And Ghayru Muqallideen, anti-followers. They explain this name to mean that they do not merely imitate the scholars. The Ghayru Muqallideen. They say this means that they do not merely imitate the scholars. Rather, they imitate the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam through the hadiths. That's how they explain that name. But in fact, it really means that they do not follow qualified scholarship. They just open the books. They're page flippers. What it means is that they're page flippers. They open the books of hadith and turn through them without formal education. And then they just start explaining according to what appears to them in accordance with their corrupted understandings. And perhaps one of them doesn't even know Arabic, so he's just flipping through translations. Once I asked one of our sheikhs, is there a difference between Wahhabis in America and Wahhabis overseas? He said, yes, in America they're more ignorant. Truly, they are Ahlul Kibr, people of arrogance, and Ahlul Dalalah, the people of misguidance, and Ahlul Bid'ah, the people of innovation or heretics, and Mushabbihah, the likeners or God comparers, and Mujassimah, body worshippers, and Jihawiyah, those who believe that God is in a direction, and Sawtiyah, those who believe that God has a voice, and Hashwiyah, ramblers, and Mubtadi'ah, heretics, and Kuffar, blasphemers and disbelievers. We're talking about here any of them who have their fundamental belief. The known belief of Wahhabis, which is to believe that Allah is a body, even if they deny it, even if they deny the word body, as we'll see, but they do believe it. In meaning they believe it, and usually in expression they'll deny it. Those are kuffar, disbelievers. Among other titles like the Najdis, because they first emerged from the land of Najd. And they are mushriks, pagans, because they associate creations with God. Wal-'iyadhu billahi tabaraka wa ta'ala. It is easy for an ignorant person to commit kufr because of them, and many have fallen into their snare. Because besides their kufr, they talk and dress like Muslims. They appear to be Muslims. They imitate Muslims. They mimic Muslims. However, if lent a listening ear, they surely will throw an unfortunate soul into the black flames of Jahannam. This does not include anyone who does not believe the blasphemous belief of the Wahhabis but may call himself a Salafi. That's in bold because it's important. When we say the Wahhabis are kuffar, that's a correct generalization. Generalization. It's correct. And no one says that you cannot generalize but an ignorant person. Only an uneducated person says you can't generalize. But an educated person knows that generalizations are valid. So, generally, Wahhabis are kuffar. This is their known belief. That's how we know them. What's the difference between a Wahhabi and, let's say, a Qadiani? Because we know what the Qadianis believe. We know what the Wahhabis believe. What's the difference between a Wahhabi and a Shiite? Because we know what the Shiites believe. Does it mean every single Shiite believes what every other single Shiite believes? Or is it possible that some of them didn't believe some things? Yeah, it's possible. Some of them didn't believe some things. Possible that some people who call themselves Wahhabis don't believe some things that Wahhabis really do believe. I once met a woman. She said she was an Ahmadi, an Ahmadiyya. I told her the Ahmadiyya, they believe that there's a prophet after Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. She said, no, they don't. I said, yes, they do. She said, no, they don't. I told her, yes, they do. She said, I never heard them saying this. So she affiliated herself with them without taking their blasphemous belief. Let whoever meets one of these deviant people not be intimidated. You might be intimidated when you encounter someone who talks very confidently, and a lot of them put effort to pronounce the Arabic properly, and they dress like Muslims, and they quote names of scholars. They would appear to be very devoted Muslims, and for someone who doesn't have a lot of knowledge, would appear to have a lot of knowledge in so many cases. I even remember for myself as a new Muslim, maybe I wasn't Muslim for a year, but I did hear the warning about the Wahhabis. And once I was in a meeting somewhere, and there was a person there. He talked like he had knowledge to me at the time. He seemed like he had knowledge. Just at that glance there in that session, hearing him talk seemed like he had knowledge. So I said, well, let me ask a person of knowledge a question. So I said to him, I think I asked him, what do you say about Sufism? And then he proceeded to refute tasawwuf. And I didn't take from him, but there I learned a lesson right there. To see even what is a level of knowledge for an ignorant person. What does knowledge look like to an ignorant person? Or what does knowledge sound like to an ignorant person? You can have someone who's ignorant and he sounds knowledgeable to an ignorant person. Or he has some traces of knowledge, but really he should not be taken from. And so to the ignorant person, he seems to be very knowledgeable. So don't be intimidated by those Wahhabis. Once you realize you're dealing with a Wahhabi, don't be intimidated. Nor should one underestimate every one of them. Don't underestimate every one of them, because you would find, if you don't have a lot of knowledge, you would find that they have things you don't have answers for. So don't underestimate every one of them until you master this book. When you master this book, then inshallah you will crush every Wahhabi you come across. Even if it was Ibn Baz himself, or Uthaymeen himself, or any of those. Who you want, Dawood Adib, or Bilal Phillips, or any one of them. You'll smash them. They will not want to talk to you, inshallah. Some Wahhabis study and memorize, ready to bombard their opponent. But this book should give you the answer for every trick they have up their sleeves. This concludes the introduction differentiating between Ahlus Sunnah and the Wahhabis. Now we shall embark on the main topic of the book, establishing the correct belief and refuting the Wahhabi conviction.